From our studio in Midtown, this is Radio Kingston, WKNY, AM 1490, FM 1079, Kingston, New York.
We is back. Good morning, Mr. Pookie Blauweiss and Mr. Euling. Are you on the line, gentlemen?
I am. It's actually Gary Bohan. My great-grandfather was the Hewling, Mark Hewling. But yes, thank you for having me.
Oh, Mr. Bowen, sorry for me just being totally misplaced. And you, what's it like? Right church, wrong pew, or something like that? They used to say when we were kids. You could relate to that. No, Mr. Bohan, I want to thank you for coming on and doing some sniffing around. There was an article, folks, in what's it, About Town, Stephen? I Googled yesterday. It's a publication for Kingston, Gardner, New Paltz, Mr. Bowen, and they had a really cool little write-up about your family and the whole explanation. And there's even a Wikipedia, Stephen, about that. Do you know that?
There should. I did not know that.
Well, you better know about it, Pookie, because you're the one that helped me get this good guy on. And Mr. D.
I know. Well, I have Gary has been a sweetheart and has come to many of our presentations this year, and we've gotten to be good friends. He's vetted all of our information of the entry that we have in the book, and with photographs and everything, and we got to know each other, and we're really excited about his new book coming out this spring.
Well, you know, and Mr. Bohan, it's interesting. Pookie and I and Mr. D, rest him. Mr. D, he's the one that gave me the skinny on your family's SEAL College, which apparently, after my research, it was for sea lions and not necessarily, right?
That's right. Well, you know, the two terms were often used interchangeably at the time. So seal, sea lion, there is a difference, but you know, like I said, the press often use the terms interchangeably.
Well, let's Stephen, let's get our good guest here to tell us who he is, what he's connected to, who his family, in fact, is, and also, didn't you live or didn't you out there that the college, if you will, was out there in Higginsville, out in that neck of the woods?
Yeah, no, exactly. The imagine you're on Washington Ave heading towards the thruway exit.
Okay.
And you've got the Best Western on your left, Picnic Pizza on your left, and then you cross the Esopus. As soon as you cross the Esopus on your left, that's where the SEAL College facility was, where all the SEALs were trained.
Cool.
Now, can I just interject for a second? So there's a car dealer now there, and a couple of things here. One is many people will know Olympic Diner, and it's directly across from there.
It was the gateway, pal. It was the gateway before the Olympic. Go ahead.
Now, this is exactly. Now, this I'd like if Gary can sort of work backwards, because it's surprising to me how few people, even of the age or were in their 80s, who would know about it, don't know about the SEAL College. And Gary, one thing I know many more people will know about is the barn, and if you could maybe work backwards from there.
Right. Stephen, I'm glad you brought it up. In the first hour, I taught Mrs. Saravella. Remember, she called it and she used to hang there in the day, the barn. Go ahead, Mr. Bowen. Thank you, Stephen.
All right, so the barn was actually initially called Hewling's Barn, and that was operated by my great-grandfather, Mark Hewling. So the history behind the barn, which some of the old-timers will remember, is that was the original location of the SEAL training quarters that opened up in 1914. So they opened up, they being my great-grandfather and two of his brothers, they opened up a facility to train SEALs in 1914, and they ran that for 15 years until 1929. And then there was actually a bad fire. They lost several of their SEALs, and my great-grandfather decided to get out of the business, turned that structure into a nightclub called Hewling's Barn. He sold it in the late 30s, and then the name got changed from Hewling's Barn to The Barn. When he sold the nightclub, he decided to get back in the business and built the structure next to the barn, and that was what SEAL College became.
So let's now go into the genealogy, if you will, the family tree. Okay, we're now talking to one of the fruit people of the family tree. That's you, Mr. Bowen. So go ahead, you're up.
I haven't been called a fruit in a while, but
that's all right.
Careful there, Shane.
No, actually, you're reading into it, Pookie. I'm fine with it. But go ahead, Mr. Bowen.
So anyway, you now had the barn, which was the nightclub restaurant, and next to that, in 1939, was this new facility called Seal College, and that arguably became the most famous facility for training SEALs. Even more well known than their original facility. So there was. It opened up in March of 1939. There was a huge ceremony. There was hundreds of people that showed up to the SEAL College, and John Schwenk, which may be a name.
Mayor Schwenk Drive, yes, sir.
He was alderman at large at the time. He later, of course, became mayor.
That's right.
And he delivered the opening day address, and I'll just read you one of his quotes. It gives me great pleasure to preside at this occasion because it marks the beginning of added fame for Kingston and Ulster County.
Well, okay. So we've got the family tree there, Stephen, and the beginning in 1930. So now I'm gonna say. So we got the who, we got the where, we got the what. So now I'm going to throw some things at you, folks. What were the names of these two pup seals?
Well, there were many seals.
Now, I mean, the most famous now with Abbott Costello there, guy. Come on now. I don't want to belittle the other ones, but go ahead.
And the seal we're talking about is Sharkey. So Sharkey, that's Sharkey EY. A lot of people forget the E. Sharkey EY. And without a doubt, he was the greatest performing sea lion in the history of show business. And he was trained right there at SEAL College.
Yow, that's pretty cool. Go ahead.
So and all told, through the years, Mark and two of his brothers, the one retired in the 20s, the other one had another, I should mention, his brother Ray, Mark's brother Ray, had a very famous seal in the 20s and 30s named Charlie. Mm-hmm. Now, but not for the arrival of Sharkey, Charlie would have been the greatest of all time.
Wow.
Charlie played the big time. He played the London Palladium. He played the Palace in Manhattan.
Wow.
The L.A. Orpheum.
Wow.
The New York Hippodrome. And in fact, Charlie, he's buried right in Kingston, and there's a gravestone marker that still exists to this day in Charlie's memory. So Charlie was the 20s and 30s, and then along came Sharkey. And the rest is history.
Well, let me ask you this now with that chronology. When I was a kid, and I didn't see the originals, like Pookie, Stephen, Blauweiss, the Abbott Costello movies, which of these little buddies, excuse me, not Buddy, but Sharkey or Charlie or Bud, who were in their movies? Which one?
That was Sharkey.
That was Sharkey?
Yep, so Sharkey, that was 1942 when that movie was made, pardon my sarong. Okay. And Sharkey was fresh off of, he had starred on Broadway 2 years earlier in a Rodgers and Hart musical. And that's really how he came to fame in 1940. He ended up working the Steel Pier in Atlantic City the summer of 41, and that's where he met Abbott and Costello. They were working the pier as well, so they brought him on board. And that's how he ended up going to Hollywood.
When did the Barnum and Bailey Circus gig come in?
The Barnum and Bailey, that was their original claim to fame. They hit the big time in 1912 when Mark Hewling and his brother Frank really got the break of a lifetime. They got hired. They were a feature attraction. With Ringling Brothers, and that was 1912, and the circus at the time. I mean, there was no bigger event that came to town than the circus. There was no bigger circus than Ringling
Greatest
Brothers.
Show on earth. They used to promote, right?
Greatest show on earth, absolutely. So, so they worked with Ringlings for about 20 years, and that was their during the rail traveling days. I listened to your show from about the model railroad, and they were talking about the circus train. That was just so interesting to me. Mm-hmm. How they had modeled it after the Ringling Brothers. I used to go to that train show as a kid, so it's fascinating to me that it's still in existence. But anyway, they did Mark and one of his brothers, they did Ringling Brothers for a couple decades, and then their other brother Ray, like I said, he got involved with Charlie. Charlie started off in Ringling Brothers, then went solo, and like I said, he made a name for himself.
So now I'm gonna ask you something.
Wait, can I just?
Go ahead.
I just want to chime in.
Yeah, no. Go ahead.
That I discovered that I thought it was neat, and I'd mentioned this a couple of times within the last year, is that in 1949, so it's 7 years after that Abbott and Costello. And in all fairness, I mean, it's amazing to be part of any Abbott and Costello, but it was one of the B movies. I'm not dissing it at all, but it wasn't one of the most famous. But it's amazing that the seal was in there. And then what I love is the thing, and then we've added this in the book, and one of the things that we talk about in our book, and again, Gary's book is coming out, and when I just finished what I'm saying, if he could answer that and maybe mention a little bit about his book coming out too, because I don't want to forget to talk about that a little bit, but is that it's interesting, in 1949, both of Kingston's drive-ins opened at the same time, and many people remember 9W, where
right.
King's Plaza is now, and then the other one off of 28 near Kenko, and that one on 28, Sunset Drive-In, premiered with, even though it was 7 years after the Abbott and Costello came out, they actually opened with the Abbott and Costello because they knew that, and I love this, that an eighth of a mile away, right at the beginning of Washington Avenue, was the Seal College, and that's just a wonderful tying things together. And Gary, can you speak to that, and then also mention about your book coming out?
Yeah, so that's happened exactly as you said, Stephen. There was an article in the Freeman, Sharkey to be the sunset attraction. And, Sharkey was, Sharkey was the mayor of Kingston, in fact, during the 40s and 50s. He was
we could use Sharkey right now, okay, in government. Oh, what do you think? I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Mr. Bond.
So, no, he truly was the hometown hero, and there was, let me get my year. It was 1948. Sharkey came off the road and was in Kingston for a couple months, and my great-grandfather and his right-hand man, Billy Rowe, which is a name that probably a lot of the old-timers will remember as well. Billy was also closely associated with Sharkey. So Mark Hewling and Billy Rowe put on a free show in the barn parking lot. So Bob Tietzel, maybe another name that's familiar to some, he was the proprietor of the barn.
Yeah, the Hewling family, they sold to him, correct?
I think in the interim, they sold to this guy Fitzpatrick, if I'm not mistaken.
And then he flipped it to Tietzel, Mr. Tietzel?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So anyway, they decided to put on a couple of free shows. This is May of 1948, and the place filled up. So Mark decided to put on 3 more free shows the following week. Those filled up, and so he decided to put on 3 more free shows the following week, which was Memorial Day weekend. Those filled up. He added one more on Memorial Day, right after the Kingston Parade. Mm-hmm. But that's just the type of interest there was in Sharkey. He was the hometown hero, as was Charlie during his day. And there was. As the book is coming out and people are finding out about it, I'm getting all sorts of wonderful recollections from people that remember going to see Sharkey when they were growing up, and that's great to hear from people like that.
Yeah, I'd encourage anyone who's listening to the show, if they have any kind of information, memorabilia, or if this is refreshing the recollection, contact the station, reach out to Stephen, so that they could share their experiences. Okay, whatever you're talking about. So tell us quickly the book now, and because I got to ask you some other questions. Go ahead.
I've been working for 6 years on this book, and it's going to be coming out next April. It's published by SUNY Press. And it is called Sharkey, When Sea Lions Were Stars of Show Business, 1907 to 1958. So it's, like I said, it's coming out next April. You can pre-order, though, in all the usual places, on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. If you want to pre-order locally, you can go online. Rough Draft Bar and Books has got it right here in Kingston. Avalon Books and Rhinebeck. I think the Golden Notebook's got it available online for pre-order up in Woodstock. So it's it's out there for pre-order. And like I said, it'll be it's coming out next April, and I can't wait.
That sounds cool. Now I'm going to ask you test you now with what I read last night. Some things. What is the reference to the heart of Cold River flow?
Well, you may be thinking of where the River Shannon flows.
Okay.
That was Sharkey's music feature.
That's what it was. So that was his theme. That was his theme song, basically the theme song for Sharkey.
So that was his music feature, and he played it. He played it quite convincingly. I've got several live recordings of him playing it, and it's something to hear him play "Where the River Shannon Flows" on this instrument. It's a homemade instrument that Mark Hewling designed and made. Mark was very mechanically inclined, and Sharkey. That was his music feature, and there was actually a little story. There was a radio dispute back in 1940 between ASCAP and BMI, and the long and short of it is ASCAP was demanding higher and higher royalties, and ASCAP controlled all the Broadway composers and owned the cream of the crop, and they decided to jack up their rates. And in 1940, radio stations around the country decided not to renew their ASCAP contracts. So radio stations were playing no ASCAP music. The Sharkey was due to be on the radio. So happens that Where the River Shannon Flows was controlled by ASCAP. So the radio station contacted ASCAP and said, hey, we got a trained seal. We okay with him playing Where the River Shannon Flows? And the ASCAP lawyers said, nope. And it made headlines all over the country. The New York Times, from New York to Honolulu, the story was Sharkey's off the air, ASCAP ends radio career of trained seal. It was a huge...
This is an outrage. This is a day of infamy. What's going on, Mr. Bowen?
So anyway, that was... And there was a fellow that did a podcast about that, which was my gateway into learning more about the story and writing the book.
You know what would have been cool, Stephen, if I would have known about the heart of Cold River flow, its derivation, and that was Sharkey's music, and then what Mr. Bowen just stated about the legal little distraction. If we would have had a copy of that recording today, what I'm going to ask you to do is to work with Stephen to get that to Warren Lawrence, okay, in the station, because that should be something that could be here also for the archives. That's pretty wild. Let me ask you now.
I will absolutely do that. In fact, I've got Sharkey playing Where the River Shannon Flows on the Ed Sullivan Show.
A really big show, right? So, all right, I'm sorry. I'm corny here, but it goes with the territory, I think. So,
Dane, can I just ask, how many times was Sharkey or other SEALs from the Hewling parade on the Ed Sullivan Show, roughly?
5 or 6 times. I know of 5 definite, and there may have been a 6th time, but yeah, certainly 5 times.
Like the Beatles. They were just as big as the Beatles back then.
Well, I tell you, one local connection, and this guy was on Sullivan a bunch of times too, was Pegleg Bates Him and Sharkey, in fact, they often work together.
Really?
For those that don't know about Peg
I
Leg
didn't.
Bates,
That's wild.
who's a one-legged tap dancer.
Yeah. We actually had Steve.
cover him.
We covered him. Yeah, on the show. Go ahead.
Yeah. So throughout the 40s and 50s, I mean, they were both A-list entertainers. They were playing the biggest. They were playing the biggest theaters in the country. They were doing all the TV shows. So I suppose it's not surprising that they worked together a fair amount.
Stevens is similar.
Sharkey and Peg Leg did Sullivan together, and there's at least one TV show where they did a skit together, Sharkey and Peg Leg. It was a nationally broadcast Christmas show that just had a bevy of stars. Harpo Marx was on it.
Yeah,
I think George Ballantyne staged the dances.
Ed Sullivan made
Sharkey and Peg Leg did a routine together.
That show, as we all know, Steve and you, Mr. Bowen, and our listeners, made so many careers. I mean, I can remember Leslie Uggams, Diana Ross, the Supremes. They were hot. But the Beatles, I remember when they were on for the first time, and the Doors even. It's interesting how eclectic and diverse Sullivan was. And then when was the last time Sharkey was on the Ed Sullivan Show?
It would have been 1956.
Okay, it was before I was born. All right, okay. We're going to take a break. We're going to come back because then I'm going to ask you about two questions, and Stephen could kick in here too, I'm sure. I want to know the story about the two girls swimming from Albany to New York who were escorted by the dear Sharkey, and then his...
Charlie. That was Charlie.
No, Charlie, hold your thunder. I don't want to steal your thunder. And then also, too, I want you to riff on the flood of 1954, what that means. So we're going to come back after the break, Adam. Radio Kingston, thank you for listening.
And we're back with more Speak Out for our final segment. And Stephen, Shane will be back in his spot in just a moment, but he obviously had framed a couple of things for the guest to speak about.
Well, one of the things, Gary, and so we're on with Gary Bohan, who is a grandson of the Hewling from the Seal College, and who just has a book coming out this April. And Gary, one thing, you just blew my mind because one of the things I've specialized in over the last 10 plus years is the Ulster County history, and you've come to some of my presentations on the black cultural history of Ulster County, and black cultural history in general is something I've been doing for 35 and 40 years, way longer. And then that you've placed these two things together that I never thought that they were together is just, I love that. And, just that there's always another thing to learn is just incredible.
So I had two questions before the break, Mr. B.
Yeah.
The first one is 1930, that major event where two girls swam from Albany to New York City, and then they had an escort. Go ahead. You're up.
Well, they did. They were swimming exactly like you say. I think they were twin girls, young teens. And as they were swimming past Kingston, Charlie so happened to be in the Hudson as well. Charlie was training to swim the English Channel. So his training regimen included working out in the Hudson River. And when the two girls swam by, Charlie decided to join them. And his trainer, Ray Hewling, Mark's brother, was...
excuse me, it was impromptu? I mean, it wasn't planned?
Oh, it was definitely not planned. And what happened was Ray had Charlie on a harness, and Charlie slipped his harness.
Oh, boy.
And broke free in the waters of the Hudson. And there were a whole bunch of people watching, and I think they were there to watch the twins, I would imagine. So there's Charlie. He breaks free from his harness, and Ray, his trainer, is going after him on his boat. He can't catch him. Charlie's darting up here. He shows up there. Ray goes over there. Charlie shows up here. It must have looked like something out of the Keystone Cops or something. So this went on and on. I think much to the amusement of the gatherers there, and it really became quite a story in Kingston lore.
So basically, the two girls, they swam from Albany to New York City with their escort, but then he absconded for a while, and I read something about this story where he consumed 20 pounds of fish a day.
Yes, yeah.
So reportedly, I guess once he got his fill, he then went back?
Well, Ray finally caught up with him and got him back into the boat and drove him home. But, the story, it's I'm looking at my notebook on that particular story. So I've got the story ran in the Kingston Freeman. I've got the Washington Post ran a story. Their headline: "Girl Twins Compelled to Leave the Water," and it talks about the being accompanied by Charlie. Kingston Freeman headline: "Charlie came back to Hewling" is the big headline. So, and the New Yorker magazine, they wrote about it. So it was,
the New Yorker wrote about it.
Well, that was Charlie was. They wrote about that in an article. Charlie was working at a place called Billy Rose's Music Hall, which is now, by the way, now that was in the early 30s. Charlie was headlining there with someone named Ben Blue. He's a big-time vaudevillian.
Okay.
And they were headlining. That theater, by the way, is now called the Ed Sullivan Theater. So
wow.
Where the Colbert Show is broadcast.
That was the original Ed Sullivan, now where Colbert does his show.
Yep.
Wow.
At the time, it was the Billy Rose's Music Theater, and Charlie was headlining. So the New Yorker wrote a piece about Charlie in their Talk of the Town section called "The Great Seal," and in that article they get into Charlie and his escapades when he broke free in the Hudson River.
This is really wild, Steve, because I'm thinking before you get to the flood of 54, to explain that, it just hit me, Stephen. Stephen's book is about historic Kingston and its connections to all over Ulster County, but to New York City. And what I'm listening to you and then doing the research about you and your family and what you've done, here we had a local family further connecting to NYC and what it did in terms of recognition for the community. And Stephen, if you want to add to that, it's just very interesting. Once again, we have another example of Kingston, okay, connecting to, the Big Apple. And then the background that you're telling me right now on Broadway, then vaudeville. Okay, fast forward, okay, when television and different means of communication was coming out with the Ed Sullivan Show platform. It's just wild, Stephen, Mr. Bowen, that, another connection.
I love that. And then even as we're saying, and beyond, so it's New York City, which was the big time, bigger than even now. That was the center of entertainment. And then nationally on top of that. And then I want to slip in one more, ask Gary something when we are ready, Shane.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, because I get to the 54 question flood after your. Okay. We want to roll here. Go ahead, Guy.
That wraps it up anyway. That's sort of like the end of the era, I think. But the one of the things is, and I forget if it was Sharkey or Charlie. Well, first of all, that people that don't realize that the seals live 20 or 30 years. So you're training and you're having these for a long time, these animals, and that also they really took to it. And was it Sharkey, the one where he was kind of a runt, they didn't think he was going to be in it, and then they started training him, and then he was in front of an audience, and then he kind of realized, their reaction to what I do, and then he kind of built on that. Can you talk about that?
That's exactly right, Stephen. Mark Hewling was initially none too pleased with the seal catcher, if you will. There was this guy, Captain George McGuire, who supplied sea lions to everyone in the world practically, and was almost going to send them back, but until Sharkey did a trick without instruction, which was really one of the things Sharkey did that totally fascinates me. At the end of the day, Sharkey was an incredible athlete, and he could juggle like the best of them. But most of all, Sharkey was a comedian. And what strikes me, and this is, you get this throughout the book, Sharkey would often improvise when he was doing, and he'd be doing these comedy routines, and the trainer wouldn't even be on stage. So Sharkey would improvise to get more laughs. I mean, he was a natural-born comedian. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he was a ham of the highest order. You put him on a stage in front of people, and look out. There was no stealing the show from Sharkey.
So, in other words, what you're saying is the good captain was allegedly, according to Mr. Ewing, providing him with a second stringer, a second-rate sea lion, for purposes of what? No. Follow me. But what came out of it is that second stringer showed the qualities, the skills, if you will, and also the intelligence. To recognize, that there could be something in it for them. It's kind of interesting, which it is. It's fascinating that basically this mammal, right? Would actually have that intelligence to be able to navigate and deal with humans in the manner that, in fact, it did, and then get over on the humans, if you want to put it that way. And I mean that politely for this
on a regular basis. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so that's my take as well. I think that the sea lion provider, who is based out of California, I think he saw something in Sharkey, and that Mark, when Sharkey came to Kingston, that Mark initially didn't see. I love writing that part of the book because I found it fascinating as well.
It gives us hope for everyone. I think every life form that basically, people may think you're nothing, and then if you're given the opportunity, you can be something. I don't know if that makes sense. And it's really on a really small level for Sharkey. So good job, Sharkey, for proving everyone wrong. So
no kidding.
So Flood of 54. What was up with the Flood of 54? Go ahead if you want to add to this.
There was also a flood in 1951.
Okay.
That was just as spectacular, if not more, than the flood of 54. I know a lot of people like to talk about the flood of 54. I talk about the flood of 51, and I tell you why. Because there's a backstory that goes to it, and the backstory is like this. The year before, in 1950, the Sharkey Reservoir was running dry. There had been a huge dry spell. Mm-hmm. And what the New York Water Commission did was they hired this climatologist, Harvard climatologist, to seed clouds in the hopes that it would rain, in the hopes that it would fill up the reservoir. So, and New York City was on the verge of running out of water. So this is in 1950. And at first, the locals, they're kind of making fun of him. He got nicknamed the Rainmaker, rather unflatteringly. And this climatologist rather deftly made no assurances nor took any credit. And it rained that spring after his cloud seeding.
Interesting.
And it rained, and it rained, and it rained. Mm-hmm. Now, the reservoir, the Board of Water Commission people, they were only supposed to fill up the reservoirs to a certain level, but they manipulated the system of reservoirs to fill them up to capacity.
Right.
So that's the backstory. 1951 rolls around. The Sharkey was over capacity. That spring, snowmelt meets with a huge rainstorm, and the Sharkey floods to levels never seen before. There's water flowing over its spillway, right. And the Esopus floods. Where Seal College was, right on the Esopus. It looks like a lake. And so there's a flyover shot that ran in the Daily News. So anyway, the flood of 51 was really a byproduct, in part, of this crazy, controversial cloud seeding experiment that happened in 1950 to shore up reservoir reserves.
Thank you, Steve. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
That's
and another great story. I can't believe it.
That's
And
wild.
I love these side stories that have to do with it. I mean, it's just the best.
And the further again, Stephen, the theme that we've been talking about now for months, connection Mr. Bowen to his book, is the further nexus connectivity between Kingston, between Ulster County, and then New York City. And it's very fast. Now, where does the flood come in and affect, okay, the Ewlings and Sharkey and Charlie and the whole SEAL College scene?
So the SEALs were all safe in both floods, the flood of 1951 and the flood of 1954. I don't really know the particulars, but there was, but the facility itself, SEAL College, was with the flood of 51, which is the one I get into in my book, was badly damaged. The barn next to SEAL College, that was so badly damaged from the flood of 1951, it closed for a half a year.
Wow.
And I mean, to look at these pictures, it barely looked like you barely recognized that there was a road there. That's how bad the flooding was.
And of course, what you explained with the cloud seeding for the New York City, which was, the Water Commission, Water Authority was a precursor to the DEP for folks out there. It's interesting, Stephen, because the overcapacity that Mr. Bowen is alluding to, and then the spillway, it's kind of analogous to today with the release of the water and the turbidity. But what I'm interested in is back then, there was no recognition of the damages that overcapacity and coming into the spillway into the Esopus by New York City. Did they pay any of those damages for those folks who suffered from what they did?
It's a great question, and one that I address in my book. You can imagine the lawsuits. There was in fact, Mark Hewling and a few others, the Tietzel, Bob Tietzel, they sued, and I don't know if they probably lost. Most lawsuits were unsuccessful against the Water Commission.
Yeah,
and there's 10 years later, it must have been 1960 or I guess 61. The Freeman did a 14-part series on the Rain Man. That's all available if you dig hard enough, which is where I got most of my information. And it's that there were tens of millions of dollars of lawsuits, but I think the Water Commission for the most part prevailed.
Right, and it's consistent. I know when we number of years back tried to seek some kind of contribution for the sinkhole, because people don't realize, I think, that the Washington Avenue Tunnel was put in as a pertinent to the Shokan project. So up until in the 90s, the Esopus Creek, the Tannery Brook would flow into Esopus, and then it was rerouted in that tunnel on Washington Avenue, Mr. Bowen, to get to the Rondout. And it resulted in the sinkhole. So what you have here is, again, another example of the lack of goodwill of the Big Apple. And it's interesting because I digress, Stephen, with Lowell Thing's book, The Street That Built the City. And with what Mr. Bowen is saying, again, it further underscores your theme, but yet it also seems that the elite in our area, Mr. Bowen, they got reimbursed over the years for any kind of loss, because when the Kirkendalls and the Cornells, they owned a lot of the property, Stephen knows, with the mountain houses up in the Ashokan, up in that neck of the woods. And when it was flooded, they were paid good money. So this is really just another example of NYC and our state government just saying, hey, local yokels, that's just the way it is. Okay, you got to deal with it. And that's why I asked you that question, and thank you for clarifying, because in my mind, I'm not surprised that very little money was obtained by those who suffered like the barn owner did at the time.
Yep. And to make matters worse, I've got an editorial from the Freeman right after the flood. The Water Commission instructed the Freeman not to give any warning. So it really put the population in danger. So in fact, 2 people died, and
oh my God!
There's an absolutely scathing editorial in the Freeman. I've got it right here, April 2nd, 1951. And where they go on and on about how they knew about it, but they were unable to provide any warning.
Oh
in the
my
paper.
goodness, Stephen, you got any information on this? What he's talking about?
No, not really. Besides that, I do have some photos that we have in the book from Bob Haynes, and Bob was the one who told me years ago. The two things that Bob actually did tell me, when I first met him years ago, was about the Seal College and the floods and the great photographs. And then there's next door, people might also remember the Pilot House. Was that related in any way?
Yeah, the Pilot House, that came around in the late 40s. In fact, my dad worked there. It was his first job I think it was like he was 16 years old. He was working at the Pilot House. So that was...
Tell our listeners what the Pilot House was. What was it? Go ahead.
It was like a greasy spoon, right? It was a diner.
Right.
And that's got its own little story. And I know, Stephen, you've got something about the Pilot House in your book, do you? Or...
We do have a little mention, and it's right in that section where we start our last section, which is sort of forgotten neighborhoods with the Seal College actually opens that chapter, and then it goes directly, because that story, works beautifully right after it with the flood, and the Pilot House, and seeing the before and after photos of what it looked like normally, and then when literally it's underwater, but except for the tippy top of the sign. I mean, it was incredible. Like what Gary is speaking about, I mean, it was like, 15 feet of water. I mean, we're talking like a lot of water.
Yeah, it was unimaginable, and... But yeah, you had the barn and the Seal College, and the Pilot House was nested in between the two.
It sounded like it was Stephen and Mr. Bowen, if you remember, like Sandy, where we had pictures of the Rondout, and where it was then Rosita's, now where the Maritime Center is. The water was up to cars were parked there. It was up to the roof of the cars. Yeah, that's crazy. But we have for you, Mr. Bowen, 2 minutes to wrap up with some kind of story or summary of your family and basically your contribution to our locale, as well as the connections to New York City. So, because we're at the last part of the hour, I got 3 minutes before they take me off with a hook. So go ahead, you're up, Mr. Bowen.
So I'll wrap it up like this. Just a reminder that my book is coming out. Sharkey, When Sea Lions Were Stars of Show Business, is coming out next April. I've got a website, GaryBohan.com, GaryBohan.com. So there's more information there, and it shows you how to get in touch with me. And just that it's been really a thrill and an honor to put this book together, and all the intersects that I could have never imagined. When I started this project 6 years ago, if you would have told me I would have gotten into some cloud seeding research, I would have said you were crazy. But there we are. And there's if you're a fan of old entertainment, if you're a fan of vaudeville, if you're a fan of old TV, this book is really, it has it all. Sharkey in particular, he was a star attraction at Radio City many times. He also did these sports shows, so he worked with superstars like Jim Thorpe,
wow,
Dave Diedrichson, Mickey Mantle, Jackie Robinson.
Oh boy!
And when TV got popular, he was on all the shows. Milton Berle, Sid Caesar, Imogene Coca, Bob Hope, Henny Youngman, Steve Allen. Sharkey did them all. So there's lots of history, and I really get into Sharkey though, because I've got nothing but respect for him as a performing artist, and I try to really
don't forget his intelligence. Don't forget Sharkey's intelligence now.
Not only was he intelligent, but he was such a ham. He'd be, if the applause wasn't to his liking, he'd take a flipper and slap his side just to say, I can't hear you. And, like I said, he'd go off script to get more laughs. He'd work these coliseums where it was like working the round, and he'd go to the section with the highest applause. So you can imagine what that scene was like. Each of the sections in the Coliseum trying to outdo the other, and there's Sharkey. So he was truly one of a kind, and he really was an amazing animal.
And you know what? This is an amazing story, Stephen. I'm glad that we were able to get this good guy on. People, I encourage you. Sounds like a fascinating read that not only the way it integrates and just incorporates all of those different topics, all through the lens of a sea lion named Sharkey. So we thank you. Go out. You can go online. You gave us the information, etc. Okay, and where it's going to be available. The book. Also, too, Stephen, I want to give a shout out to our callers who called in. Thank you, Radio Kingston, for letting us flap. Remind people about the January 1st event and the walk that we talked about earlier when Micah called in, and then also too, shout out for Rick Shashinsky, the music therapist who's going to be on January 8th. His book. You can Google Rick and his book and where it's available, Music Therapy. That is also a very, very remarkable read and very uplifting. So thank you very again, Mr. Bowen, Mr. Blauweiss. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Radio Kingston. I want everyone to have a safe, fantastic, simply outrageous, and splendiferous holiday coming up. Merry Christmas to all.